Hilchitz Gzeilah Perik Sheni. Hagzeilah Shlei Nishtanis. Elarehi Kemesha Hoyso. Is Afal Pishin Nisyaishu Abayla Mimeno. V'Afal Pishin Mes Hagazlin. V'Arehi Biyad Bonov. Is Harezu Chizeres Lebaleh Ba'atzmo. So the din is, first of all, that Yush is not Kena. That if a person is a Gazlin and the Nigzal was Miyayish, so the Gazlin is not Kena. And really, then we learned that we're going to learn Behemshach also that Yush and Shinur Shus is Kena. So the Chiddush over here is that the Yorshim of the Gazlin are not considered Shinur Shus, even though now it's by the Yorshim. Nevertheless, it's not considered Shinur Shus, and therefore it's still Chizeres L'Baleh Ba'atzmo. However, if there was a Shinu in the Gzeilah, is Aval Pisha Adayin Leinis Yaishua Ba'il Mimeno, is Kone B'Shino. And then is Mishalem Domeh, Kishaz Gzeilah, whatever was worth Kishaz Gzeilah. So the din is basically that Shinoi is not Kena by Gzeilah. I'm sorry, Yush is not Kena by Gzeilah. And Yush even with Yerusha is also not Kena by Gzeilah, and those for the Yarshim. And Shinoi, but on the other end, Shinoi is Kena by Gzeilah, even without Yush. Which Pashas L'chora is the same than by Gneva. We learned that by Gneva. By Gneva also, Yush is not Kena, and Shinoi is Kena. Halacha beis. V'din zeh din teiru. Shenamer v'heshev es hagzeilah shegozal. Is mepi hashmuel lomdu. Imik shegozla mishalem esa. V'im nishtan is beyadi mishalem domeh. So the Rambam is saying we'll learn this out from a pasuk. Now this pasuk is really a pasuk by Gzeilah. There's a chiyuv v'heshev es hagzeilah. You have to know how the things work with Gneva and Gzeilah. Because by Gzeilah there's a chiyuv v'heshev es hagzeilah. By Gneva the Rambam didn't mention that there was a mitzvah saseh of v'heshev. The Ram just mentioned that there's a chiyuv v'shalom to shalom, and over there was a din of. He said that the reason why you don't get malchus for gneva is because alav nitin tashlumin. He didn't say because it's alav nitin klase. But I'll call upon here the Rambam is saying that the reason why the ganev is koina the gzeilah with shinui, whereas the reason why the ganev is koina the gzeilah with shinui is from this pasuk, since it says v'heshev is hagzeilah shegozal. So we learn out imken shegozal yazer. In Latske is ein shegozal, so then there's no chiyuv of yazer. So that chiyuv of yazer goes, and then there's another, the mishalom domeh. That did mishalom domeh doesn't say in v'heshev is hagzeilah. The chura you have to know where's the mocker from v'shalom is domeh. But l'chura what the Rambam is saying v'din zeh din teiru that shinu is kena because it says v'heshev is hagzeilah shegozal piashmu lamdu imik shegozla mishalom esa and the shtan is biyade is mishalom domeh, and you don't have to pay back the original item. Nisyaishu habayla mimenu v'lei nishtanis is kona hagazlin kol hashvach sheishbiach achrayush. So even though the gazlin has to give back the guf hagneva to the original owner, but the shvach that the gneva that the gzeilah had, he keeps kona hagazlin kol hashvach sheishbiach achrayush ve'enim mishalem ela kishas hagzeilah. And v'dover zeh midivreim this adin derabon mipnei takonas hashav. So in other words, the din is that the Gazlin could keep the Shvach, that the Gzeilah was Mashbiach, Achar Yush, even though he wasn't Kenet Achar Yush. Ukshemar Zelei Gzeilah is Shamalei HaShvach v'Neitel Manan Nigzel. Now over here, the Rambam here says that this din, that the Gazlin gets the Shvach after the Yush, is a din derabon, v'dover zem midivreim. The Rambam mentioned this din in Hilchas Gneva as well. Over there, the Rambam didn't mention that it's a din derabon. The Rambam Aruch over there writes Taka that it's a din derabbanan, and based on the din over here, but l'chura it's a little bit modna that the Rambam over there, when the first time he mentions it in Hilchas Gneva, over there he doesn't mention it's a din derabbanan. Masha'inkin over here, Dafka over here, he mentions it's a din derabbanan. L'chura tzorech iyun. Maybe you could think, there's a mokum to think, to say like this, that by Gneva there's no chiyuv v'heshiv. There's no chiyuv v'heshiv. There's a din. There's a chiyuv of tashlumin, but there's no din of v'heshiv. So in Mela, once the Bailam were miyayish, so ena chinami, the item didn't become yours because sof kol sof there was a chiv tashlumin, but the shvach that happens, b'rshus haganev, belongs to the ganev. In other words, that din is a din teira, because since he was a yush of the Bailam on this item, so therefore, even though the item has to be returned as din tashlumin, but on the other hand, the shvach that happens after that belongs to the ganev. Masha'enkin by Gazlin, where there's a chiv v'heshiv is hagzeilah, so the heshiv hagzeilah means you have a chiv v'heshiv is hagzeilah. And memela, if there's the chiv v'heshiv, that prevents you from being able to become the shvach lachar yush, because lachar yush there's still a chiv v'heshiv is hagzeilah. And therefore, this din that you're kena the shvach lachar yush is only a din rabban. So it's not the in other words, this would be a chidush. And I don't know if it's true that the pshat is that's the pashtus of the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Gneva didn't mention that the fact that the ganav is kind of the shvach lachar yush is only a din d'Rabbanan. And over here, the Rambam clearly says that the shvach that's lachar yush is din d'Rabbanan. The question is that hu adin b'gneva? And the Rambam was relying on what he said here, which is l'chura not al derech hapshat, or say no, that there's a chiluk between gneva and gzeilah. And if yes, what's taka the chiluk? So we're suggesting that maybe since by gzeilah there's a chiyuv of v'heishav as gzeilah, there's this mitzvah I say v'heishav as gzeilah, so that prevents you from being koina anything of this gzeilah, even lachar yush. Halacha gimel. V'davar zeh medivreim mipnei takonas hashavim u'kshemachzor le'agzeilah. So when the gazlan gives back the gzeilah to the nigzal, so since the shvach is doch the gazlans, is shomer le'ashvach, and that's v'neitel min nigzal. Halacha gimel. So yush is not kenes. So in other words, if a gazlan is goizel something and he has the item, so he has to return the item back to the original nigzal, even though he was meyayish. There's just a din d'Rabbanan that the shvach that comes after yush, that remains with the gazlan. Now mochra hagazlan ein nosnim matana afal pi shalei nishtanis hagzeilah, even though there was no shinui, is eine chizeres ba'atzma miyad alekech. So the item itself doesn't go back to the nigzal miyad alekech. Hoyel v'nisyai bailam. Since there was already yush, so mele there was yush and shinui rishus. So yush and shinui rishus, it belongs to the lekech. Bein lifnei mechiro nesina, whether the yush happened before the gazlan sold it or gave it away, and bein lacher mechiro nesina. Either way, kana lekech, the lekech was kated, be yush v'shinui rishus. And we mentioned that there's a machlekes rishenim. The Rambam holds that this yush could be even after the mechira, and nevertheless the lekech is kated be yush v'shinui rishus. Other rishenim hold not like that. All the rishenim hold that this din of yush and shinui rishus is only in a case where the yush happened before the shinui rishus. Masha'inkin, if the yush happened after the shinui rishus, so then it still goes back to the nigzal, to the nigzal. Halacha dalet. Now we learned that a gazlan, that the bailam was nisyayish, so even though be'etzem, the item still belongs to the nigzal, but if there was a shvach, so midarkana d'Rabbanan, that shvach belongs to the gazlan. Now, that's din number one. Now we learned another din, that if there was yush and shinui rishus, so then the item belongs to the lekech. If there was a yush and shinui rishus, the item belongs to the lekech. Now we're learning that this din, that the shvach belongs to the gazlan, we said the shvach belongs to the gazlan after yush. The huadin, if the gazlan went ahead and sold an item, but he sold the item lifnei yush. Nachmal, a gazlan stole something, and then he went ahead and he sold it lifnei yush. So the emes is, since he sold it lifnei yush, so the item goes back to the nigzal. The item is the nigzal. But if the gazlan was mashbiach, and then he sold it to someone or he gave it away, so be'etzem, if it would have remained by him, it would have gone back to the nigzal with the shvach, because it's lifnei yush. But over here, since he sold it, so just like the din is, that if it's by him by him, and it was acher yush, so the din is that the gazlan keeps the shvach. So it was a special takon l'Rabbanan that if there was yush, he keeps the shvach. So there was another takon l'Rabbanan that if he sold it, that shvach that he sold also should go to the lekech. In other words, even though meikar the din of be'emes, just like by acher yush, meikar the din really belongs to the nigzal. It really belongs to the nigzal. It's just there was a takon l'Rabbanan that the shvach should remain by the gazlan. If the gazlan sold it and there was no yush, so mele really doesn't belong to the lekech. But nevertheless, since there was a sale, so therefore we say that this shvach belongs to the lekech. That's this din. Hagoizel v'hishbiach. A person was goizel v'hishbiach, and then umochar oihoirish lifnei yush, and then he went ahead and sold it, or he moirish it. In other words, he went to the yoirish lifnei yush. There was no yush. So be'emes, who owns the item still belongs to the nigzal. And be'emes l'churim meikar the dinner, the shvach also belongs to the nigzal. But nevertheless, there is a din, a special takona d'Rabbanan, amashehishbiach heirish amashehishbiach mocher. That what it was mashbiach, that's what he was heirish and that's what he was mocher. So in other words, we're saying that just like there's a din of yush and shinui rishus together, both cause that there should be a shinui and it should become uis the gazlans. Should become a lekech. Yush alone doesn't really call it. cause it. And Shini Rishus alone also doesn't cause it. But just like Yush causes that the Shvach should be the Gazlans, so Al Derez Shini Rishus causes that the Shvach should be the Lekechs. And Memela V'Kanu Lekech a Yerush is a Shvach. And over here there's a Chidush that even though we learned before that Yerusha is not really called Shini Rishus, so that wouldn't be called the Yush V'Shini Rishus, but Lagabi this Takana D'Rabbanan, that La'acha Shini Rishus, the Shvach should belong to the new owner, so Lagabi that Yerush is also called a new owner, even though he's not B'amas Shini Rishus, like we said before, that if a person was Miyayish and then it was Hayrish, so the Nigzal takes it away from the Yerush, because it wasn't a Yerush and Shini Rishus. But Lagabi this din, that his Kainas HaShvach belongs to the Yerush as well. Let's go again. I'll read again. HaGoizel, a person stole an item, and then the Hishbiach, and the item became better. Something was a Shvach, a Gizus Ivlodis, and then Umachar Oyhirish, Lifnei Yish, and he went ahead and sold it Lifnei Yish. So Ba'atzim, the item is not really a sold item, but nevertheless, Mashe Hishbiach Hirish, Mashe Hishbiach Machar. What he was Mashbiach, and that's what was sold, and that was Yerusha. And Memele V'Kanu Lekech Yerish Es HaShvach, which is all a din d'Rabbanan. And Memele V'Neitel Gmei HaShvach Min HaNigzal. So when the Nigzal comes along, he wants his item back. So you say, yeah, you could take the item back, but you have to pay me the Gmei HaShvach. U'Mazal Le'Gzeilah, and he has to return him the Gzeilah. And then, but the Nigzal is tiny, that L'chure, the Shvach is really mine. The Shvach is really mine. It's just that there's Psadin Takara D'Rabbanan. So the Takara D'Rabbanan is L'Toivas HaLekeach. But on the other end, the Gazlan himself has to pay the Nigzal for the loss of this Shvach. The Chayzer HaNigzal v'Noitel D'mei HaShvach Min HaGazlan. Shaharei L'Nisyash, was L'Nisyash, Be'emes, this Shvach should have gone back to him. This Shvach should have gone back to him. And Memela, now that he went ahead and sold it, through that he lost the Shvach. So Memela, the Gazlan has to pay back the Nigzal for that Shvach that he lost. The Gazlan has to pay back the Nigzal for the Shvach that he lost, but the Shvach remains by the Koinu or by the Yerush. V'chein, im Mishbiach HaLekeach HaYerush, if the Lekeach or Yerush was Mishbiach, is also Neitel HaShvach Min HaNigzal. He takes the Shvach Min HaNigzal. In other words, the first case was that the Gazlan was Mishbiach and then he sold it. The Gazlan was Mishbiach and then he sold it. So the din is that he takes the person that he sold it to, or he was Meirish to, keeps the Shvach, and he goes ahead and goes back to the Gazlan, and he muns the money from the Gazlan. Over here we're talking about if the Lekech or the Yerush were Mashbiach, so just like if the person that sold it to them would have been Mashbiach, they would have kept it. So Al Derez, if they were Mashbiach, they also keep it. But on the other hand, when the Nigzal wants to take back the item, so Neitel HaShvach Min HaNigzal. Now, in this case, do we say that he could go back to the Gazlan and mun the money for the Shvach? Could be not. Because Bishleim, in the previous case, where the Shvach was Biyad HaGazlan, and at that point in time, the Gazlan was supposed to return to the Nigzal, side the item, side the Shvach. So now, when he goes ahead and he sells it to the Yerush, or even if he sells it to the Yerush, so at that point in time, so he says to him, you were mafsid me the Shvach. Mashenkin over here, there was never a Shvach. The Shvach erst happened biyad ha-lekech, or biyad ha-yerush. And how he goes all that, and he says, listen, you don't have a right to the Shvach. So if he wants to take the item back with the Shvach, he has to pay for it. But l'chura, at that point in time, could be he can't go back to the Gazlan. I'm not sure, it doesn't say. It doesn't say, v'chein mishbiach ha-lekech ya-yerush, so then it's Neitel HaShvach Min HaNigzal. The Yerush and the Leker, they take the Shvach Min HaNigzal, but it doesn't say at this point in time that the Nigzal is going to go back to the Gazlan a month from the money that he's paying to this Leker. I'll go upon. Halacha. Now this whole din was a takana for the Leker. Since he sold him the item, so we say the item goes back, but the Shvach of this item the Leker keeps. Now Mocher HaGazlan L'Goy. If the goy is the one that bought the item, is afal pisha ishbiach hagoy, is chizeres lebaleh, goes back to the bailam, because this takana that the shvach of the item should still belong to the lekeach, that was a takana for a yid, not for a goy. Now mochra hagoy li Yisrael acher sheishbiach. So what happens? A yid went ahead and was the gazlan. He sold it to a goy, and that goy was mashbiach. Now at that point in time, the din was that the shvach goes back to the nigzal, because there was no takana for the goy. Now the goy went ahead and sold it to a Yisrael. The goy went ahead and sold it to a Yisrael. So there was a gazan Yisrael. He sold it to a goy, and then the goy sold it to the yid after there was already the shvach. The goy was already mashbiach. Is hail v'hagazan Yisrael, v'zeshi biyadi Yisrael. So therefore, kana shvach. So therefore, the Yisrael tain is the shvach is his. The shvach is his, and therefore, so I mean, be'emes l'churi, you have to give back the item, just take the money. But over here, he's tiny. I don't want to give back the item unless you give me the money. L'churi, that's the pashtus advar. In other words, this likeach from the goy that bought it from the gazlan, that took it from the nigzel. So now the nigzel is coming along to this Yisrael. He said, give me back my item and plus the shvach. So on that, the Yisrael is tiny. I'll give you back the item. But let's say if the shvach is on the item, let's say there's gizes on the item, I don't want to give you back the item until you give me the money for the item, because lepeil, I have a tfisa on the item and the shvach is mine, or it's maybe mine. So therefore, I don't want to give you back the item. So the din is he has a right. Kana shvach memele he could taina. I don't want to give you the item until you pay me for the shvach. However, if the nigzel grabs back the item with the shvach, and now the Yisrael is telling no, pay me for the shvach. So the din is a mitzim miyadi. You can't be mitzim miyadi the shvach, because lepel over here there's a suffix. It's a sveika the dinah whether or not the nigzal is entitled to the shvach, which right now finds itself biyada Yisrael, just like he was entitled to the shvach that was biyada goy, or no, since now it's biyada Yisrael. So there is a takana. So therefore, the Yisrael doesn't have to give him back the shvach. However, unless he pays him for it, masha'inkin, if he grabs it, so now the Yisrael has no right to ask him for the money. Halacha vov. Kvar biyanu shagzela sheishbicha achriyush ayacher shenishtanis is a shvach legazel. Whether the shvach happened after yush or it happened after nishtanis, the shvach is legazel. And the Rambam fears uismut takonas hashavim. The chur you have to understand, because B'negei hishbicha acher yush that the Rambam said before was takonas hashavim. But the fact that it was hishbicha acher shenishtanis, that's l'chura meikra dedina, because la'acher shenishtanis the gazlan was kaina. Im kein shegazel yazer v'im lav leyazer. There's no chiyuv chazara. So obviously the shvach is his. So the word mipnei takonas hashavim is really only going on acher yush. It's like it's not in the chura. The Rambam is writing it after the word acher shenishtanis. Anyways, kvar biyanu shagzela shishbicha acher yush acher shenishtanis hashvach legazlan mipnei takonas hashavim. So therefore it's also la'acher yush. And afal pish ishbicha meila, even though the shvach was meila, ketzat gazal pora v'nesabra etzli ben shiyod. So we learn behemshel that if he was mashbiach himself, so even if it was lifnei yish, it's his. If a gazan steals something and he goes ahead and he's mashbiach the item himself, so meila that shvach is his. That shvach is his. And that shvach is his even more than a person is yedel l'techsad chaveri and he's mashbiach it. So the shvach is not really his. Then he only is yodi ala tachtena, and he only takes either the shvach keneged ha'itzah. Masha'inkan over here, since the gzela is nimtzaz b'rshusei, is when he's mashbiach it biyodayim, the shvach is his. That's what we'll learn b'hemshach. Over here we're talking about when the shvach comes b'meila. That's afal pi sheshbicha meila. But so normally shbicha meila, the shvach belongs to the nigzal. But on the other end, if the shbicha meila happened after yush or after shinoi, so then it belongs to the gazan. Ketzat gazel para v'nis abra etzlei ben sheyolda kedem shetavi bedin, whether there was already the leido or ben shadayin leyolda, or gazel rochel v'nitora etzlei, he stole a sheep and now it has wool on it. Ben shegazes a kedem shetavi bedin, ben shadayin legazes, whether it was shorn or not. Aber hail v'nis yashua bailam. We're talking about a behemoth that was already nis yashua bailam. So therefore, Mishalim Kishas Gzeilah. So he's Mishalim Kishas Gzeilah, and Memela. So what does mean Mishalim Kishas Gzeilah? In other words, he gets the money back. He has to give the behemoth back with the wool or whatever. But on the other, he gets money back for what it's worth extra because it's mu'beres, or what it's worth extra because it has wool on it. V'im yoldo v'gazuso. So now they're separated. The original Karen and the shvach are separated. So then it's like Gzeilah V'Aveidah shel gazlan. So then the gizim was b'lemein to the gazlan. V'madayin leyolda v'legazazo. So then shomalei, she will assess how much is it worth. V'neitla shvach min hagazlan. U'machzor abeim atzmi. Is bekitzer the nekudas that varim is that when a person steals an animal, the person's gazlan is a behema, and that behema was a shbicha. So if the shbicha happened after yush, So the din is that the shvach belongs to the gazlan. And now, if that shvach is still part of the original behema, so what happens is that he gives back the behema to the gazlan, to the nigzel rather, and he takes from him the money. Now, if that shvach is no longer part of the original behema, the marshal was already gazza, who was already yolda, so the original behema he gives back to the nigzel, and the shvach he keeps for himself. Now, now this is talking about he was gazel a behema, which was not muberes, and it wasn't tu'una with gizes. And now, while it was by the gazlan, after Yush, it became muberes, or it became tu'una with gizes. Now, it would be a similar case. Gazel, no, it's different, but the same idea. Gazel para muberes. He was gazel a para muberes. So the para was already muberes. And now, if in the Siyai Bailim, after the Gzeilah was in the Siyai Bailim, and it was still in a state of muberes, and then Bachar Kach Yolda, and it was Yolda B'Shus Hagazlan. Or Rachel Tu'una, he stole a Rachel Tu'una, which was full of wool, and then V'Nisiyai Shu'abaylim, while it was still full of wool, and then V'Achar Kach Gazlan, then it was shorn. So the din is Mishalim Dmei Parah Himedis Leilit. So how much does he have to pay? He has to pay Dmei Parah Himedis Leilit, or Dmei Rachel Himedis Ligazes, and the value of the Parah Himedis Ligazes. And knows what he does is he has to give back. We're talking about the behema was stolen when it was muberes, and then the behema was yolda. So what he has to do is he has to return back the behema, plus he has to pay back for what the behema was worth because it was muberes. Because it was muberes, it was worth more. So mainly he has to pay back the demei para muberes leilit. But masha'enkin, the fact that it was yolda, that belongs to the gazlan, because whatever happens achar yush is the shvach belongs to the gazlan. However, v'im lifnei yush ekedim shenishtana yolde gazza knows the yolde and the gazza he stole a part of muberes or a part that was tuna, and there was no shinoi, and there was no yush, and then it was yolda. So then it's harei agizes v'avloda shel bailim v'afal pishin nesabra and nitera b'yad hagazlan. Even if the whole ibur happened b'yad hagazlan, hail v'lei nisiyai shu bailim v'lei nishtana sagzela b'rishus balehi adai nafal pish hagazlan chayv ben says. So this is the principle that we're learning the whole time. Nachamol, when a person is goizel something, so if there was no shinui and there was no yush, the item belongs to the original bailim, and memela any shvach that happens to the item, even a shvach, any shvach that happens to the item belongs to the original bailim. If, however, there was a yush or there was a shinui, so then any shvach that happens after that belongs to the gazlan, and memela, and sometimes you have to make cheshbenis. Sometimes if the shvach is still part of the behemoth, so you have to make a cheshbon. You give back the behemoth and you take the money for the shvach. If the shvach is already separated from the behemoth, so then the original behemoth you give back to the bailim, and the shvach you keep for yourself. That's this din. Halacha ches. Gonav a gozal. A person was, now here the Rambam is speaking about a gonav also. So until now the Rambam was speaking about gozal. You have to also understand all these halachas. You have to know. I mean, certain the Rambam is speaking about here in Hilchas Gzeilah. Then l'churi, you have to think what this din in Hilchas Gzeilah, what would they be by Gneva? And if the same din would be by Gneva, so why is the Rambam waiting until Hilchas Gzeilah to say these dinim, if this din also applies to Hilchas Gneva, which is tzarech bir. Halacha ches. Gonav a gozel. A person was gonav a gozel, and then the higdish, he was magdish the animal, and then the tovach, achar shenisiyai shabayl. Now, what was the Seder Advarim? So the way it's explained by Mefarshim, Reb Chaim also speaks in the Sefer about it, that it says Pshat, that it's talking about he was Gonav a Gozel, and then he was Magdish, and then he was Nesiyayish, then he was Nesiyayish Rabbayla, and then he was V'Tovach. So the Amos is Me'ikra Dedina, even though the Rambam holds, this you have to add, even though the Rambam holds that Yush helps after Shini Rishus, there's when a person sells something, and then there was Yush, so also the Lekech is Kena, even though the Lekech L'chura bought it before Yush, but that b'medvar mamurim when there was a ma'aser mechira. Masha'enkin by hegdish meikra dedina, you can't really be magdish something before Yush. So in other words, if the person was already miyayish and now you're going ahead and being magdish it, so since through the hegdish this is becoming a shini rishus, a shini Hashem, so this hegdish is chal meikra dedina. Masha'enkin, if you steal an item and then you go ahead and you magdish it, and then there was Yush, so l'chura there was never Hegdish. Because Lepel, since there was Hegdish before Yush, there was not Chala Hegdish. That's min ikra de din, min ateda. But mid Rabbanon, the Chacham instituted that when a person was magdish something and then there was yush, so the hegdish should be chal, and that's lechumra on the gazlan, on this gazlan or on the ganef, and memela will come out that let's say later on he was teveach this behema, so he has a din of shchute chutz is chayiv kortz. There's at kedikach the Chacham instituted that this behema which was gonuf, which really had no right to be magdish, and memela lechur it's not hegdish, but nevertheless since lepel there was later on there was yush, and then it was tovach. So lemafreya, the din is that lemafreya it's ki'ilu he was allowed to be magdashit, and memela when later on when he was teveach shchute kotshim b'chutz. That was an institution of the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon gave him a knas. Now since lepel right now, so what happened was he was gonaf, and then he was higdish, and then he was miyay, the bailam was miyayish, and then he was tovach. So we're saying lemafreya is considered his, but how far lemafreya? So l'chura, if since it's l'mafreya anyways, it could be l'mafreya from when he stole it. But the problem is, if you're going to say that it's l'mafreya his when he stole it, so it's going to come out that it's l'mila tivasi because the gizzes of blood are going to be his. So the Chacham said no, it's l'mafreya his right before the hegdish. Because even though really nothing happened then, but l'pil right before the hegdish midrabanan it's his, and therefore he was able to magdish it. And Memela, what do we accomplish it that he was able to be magdashit, and therefore he has the knas that if he goes ahead and shechts it, it's considered shkutei chutz. But on the other end, he's not going to gain from it that it's going to be lemafreya his for gizus of blood. That's this halacha ches. Gona ve'gozel. A person was gona ve'gozel, and then he was higdish, and then he was tovach achash nisiyai shu'abayim. You have to add that the nisiyai shu'abayim were between the higdish and the tovach. So the din is harehi b'shus hagazan. It's considered b'shus hagazan. Mishor shehigdisha bulvat. The fact that it's b'shus hagazlan, b'shor shehigdisha is a ton of rabbanon, and they're like going backwards, and they're saying, well, it was his then b'shar shehigdisha, but it's only mishor shehigdisha. Why only mishor shehigdisha? Kadesh le'echeti niska. So you don't want it to be his originally from the Gzeilah, and memela is and v'chol v'ladiseh. Whereas if you're going to give it to him from the Shas HaGzeilah, so he's going to own the Gizus of Lada. So you say, no, it's only his Mishas HaHegdish, in order him not to be able to be owning the Gizus of Ladas. Now, B'medvar Mamurim, all these dinim that we learned till now, that the Shvach really belongs to the Nigzal, unless there was Yush and Shinui Rishud, Yush or Shinui, B'medvar Mamurim B'shach HaBame'elav. This whole din that we're dealing with the Shvach, that it's only his if there was yush or shinoi. Shinoi is b'shvach habame'elav can gizus of ladas. Avalim hoisak chusha upitma. If a person is goizel an item and it was chusha, it was a thin animal, and he was pitma, he fattened it up. Then afil lifnei yush is netel min anigzal shvach hapitum. The shvach hapitum belongs to the gazlan. V'chein kol kiyetze b'dem is shvach sheyesh beitzor. And over here the shaila is l'chura. He was mashbiach something that wasn't his, so why should he own the shvach? L'churi should have a din like a yed l'sodech havei shlei b'rshus. So now we mentioned that the Mefarshim explained that over here, since he's doing it, he was a gazlan. A gazlan has certain kinyan gzeila on it, and it's b'rshus say so memela when he's mashbiach it'd be yodayim. So that shvach is his. He doesn't have a din of a yed l'sodech havei shlei b'rshus. Halacha yud. So we learned about a shinui is kena. Shinui is kena. Shinui is kena even without yush. Shinui hachezel libriyasa ain't a shinui. Shinui which could go back to its original state. So that's not really called a shinui. Ketzad hagoizel eitzim, and then the dipkom b'masmerim. He went ahead and put it together with nails, and v'asim amteva, and he made with these pieces of wood. He made a box. Is a shinui. Shariyev shelefarkon v'chezel luchas kshoya. They could take it apart, and now it's be again pieces of wood. And al derez aloch yidal gozel offer. He stole earth. And vasol levena made into a brick is also likana. Shim yadek levena. So if he goes ahead and breaks up the brick, is tachzer offer shahoisa. It'll be back offer as it was. Now gozel loshen shel matches. He went ahead and stole a piece of metal, or just a raw piece of metal, and then vasol matbeya. He made from this piece of metal a matbeya coin. It's also likana. Shim yatek matbeya. And if he'll smelt the coin, is yazel loshen shahoisa. It can become back a piece of metal. So that's going, all these things are examples of things of a shini hachezel briyas. Avalagoizel eitzim v'sorfam. If a person went ahead and steals eitzim and he burns them, so now he has ashes, or v'kitzitzim, where he breaks them apart, he cuts them apart, which we learned before, that we learned behemshel, that if you have large pieces of wood and you make it small pieces of wood, that's not necessarily called a shinu. We were talking about you had a piece of wood and you broke him up and it's in a completely different form than it was originally. A chakak bam, or he engraved them vasum kelim, so he made it into a new thing. He had a piece of wood and he made it into a kelim, made it into a cup. A shegazel tzemer, he steals wool, vitzave, or he went ahead and dyes it, so you can't really change it. A niptze v'libne, or he went ahead and niptze means like a certain cleaning process of taking out the schmutz, and v'libne, and then being malabim, also is a cleaning process, so that's changing the wool. That's niptze v'libne together, so it's only then is it considered a shinui. A shegazel tovui, he went ahead and stole thread, vaso beged, and he made it into a beged. So even though the beged could be taken apart, but it'll never be the same original thread as it was before he was made a beged. A Gzeilah V'Aveidah, he stole a brick and vaso offer. A avonim, where he took stone, visisisum, and he cut it out. In other words, he straightened it out, and it's no longer the stone as it was originally. It's like a straightened out stone. Or he took money v'hitichon, and he went ahead and smelted the mois. So then is areza shini b'yodi. That's called a shini. Now the question is l'chura, when a person steals a levena and he makes it offer, or when he steals money and he makes it v'hitiche, so l'chura you can put it and make it back into a levena, or you can make it back into money. So that the Rambam says shem yasi mois acheres, and al that is a benegei levena is ponim chadosh. It's a nup v'chein kol kietz b'zeh. Now, so in other words, it's not the original item that it was. So the pashtus advarim l'churi, you would be able to learn that ponim chadosh means even though you're making it exactly the same that it was, but lepel, it's not that original item. In other words, when you have a piece of wood and you go ahead, in other words, you have earth, and then you go ahead and make a brick from it. So you put it back, and it's the same earth that it was. In other words, the fact that the earth was a brick, it was a matzav of a brick, but now it's back to its original state of being earth. It's not new earth. Masha'inkin, when you have a coin, and then you go ahead and smelt the coin, so even though you're going to go ahead and make it back into a coin, it's not the original coin. The original coin is uis, and now you're making it into a new coin. So that's l'chura, the pashta taich of the word panim chadosh is saying. That's we had a lot of times in Sefer Torah when we had things that was originally it's a matzav and now it's a new matzav. So since it's a panim chadosh is saying, so it loses its status of tumah, even though it's identical as it was originally, but it's a new thing which is identical to its original form, and therefore it's a panim chadosh. Now the mice is the Rashi, just to point out, the Rashi in Baba Kama, when he says that this din, Baba Kama Tzadik Vav, when he speaks about Parim Chadoshes, the Rashi adds and he says that you can't really make it exact. In other words, since Ef Shel Tzamtzum, you cannot make it exact. It's vice to is, if you'd be able to make, this coin, even though it's a new coin, the original coin is no longer here. Now you're making a new coin, but if this new coin is exactly that it was originally, so then there wouldn't be a din of shini. That would be a shini achezel b'riyoseh. Masha'inkin, since you can't really make it back as it was originally, it can't be in its original form. So therefore, it's panim chadoshes. It would never really be its original form. So therefore, it's called a shinui she'eini chezel b'riyoseh. Halacha Yud Gimel. Hagoizel mois yishonis, someone that steals money mois yishonis, and v'shafan, and he rubbed them and he made it like very nice, and v'chitshon. So l'chura, now it's something new. So we say no leikon shari misyashin v'chezim kshayu. It's ultimately it's going to go back to its original state. It's going to go back to its original state. It's l'chatrila oimer that is going to go back to original state. Gozel mois chadoshim v'yishno, but if he bought mois chadoshim, he's gozel mois chadoshim, and he made it yishno, he made it like look old. So then it's gonna shem yichad shem over here panim chadosh saying, which over here is harder to understand. That even Yechachim Panim Chadosh is saying. So again, Rashi writes over there that the pshat is that it'll never really be the original state that it was, the new state that it was originally. It will never be. That's the Taich Panim Chadosh. And Rambam, it's not so clear that that's the Taich Panim Chadosh is saying. Whereas in the Rambam, you could learn that the Taich Panim Chadosh is saying, like we always learn Panim Chadoshes, that Eino Chinami, it's the same like it was, but it's not what it was. It's a new thing. It's just saying in Rambam L'chura, it's not so clear that the Rambam was learning like Rashi, because Benegay over here, Im Yechachim Panim Chadosh is saying, you have to L'chura add. According to Rashi, you have to add Panim Chadosh is saying, and it will never really be the same matzav of Chiddush like it was originally. The Rambam doesn't add that. Now Gozel Dekel Mechuber V'Kitzitze, he stole a dekel. Dekel is a palm tree, and then he cut it, is leikon. Vafilu karse chulias, even if he made it into small parts, but it's all like pieces of the original decal tree. So therefore, that's not called a shinui. However, also koiris, if he went ahead and took a tree and made it into beams, so now it's a new matzav. It's not like small trees. Over here, it's a new matzav. It's called beams. So then it's kana. Now, kozel keiris gdelis vasim ktanis. He went and bought. He made a gzeilah on big keiris, and he made it small keiris. Is leikana. However, asun luches achin l'shtan l'shmon. He took beams and he made it into like boards, into boards of wood. And no, it's no longer beams. It's like just pieces of wood, boards of wood. So then is kana. Gazel lulav. He went and stole a lulav. He hifrid olive, and he took the leaves of the lulav apart. Is kana olive. So he's kana the olive. Because lepel, it's a new shina. It's no longer part of the lulav. Now gazel olim. He stole the olim, the leaves, let's say, of a lulav. For us, chufya means like he took each leaf of an ula. A lulav is a double leaf. He went ahead and made it into chufya. Chufya is something to make a covering. So he took apart the olim, so it's no longer the same olim. It's kana. Gazel klev nasa ayil. He stole a shepsel, and it became an ayil, which is an older, that's already over a year old. Or egel a calf nasa sher is also a reza shini biyade v'kano. And therefore, mishalim kishas gzeilah, he has to pay what it was worth b'shas gzeilah. V'afal pishalim nisyaishu abaylim, and it's no longer the baylim. So knows Yush knows over here, since it's a shina, the nekudas advarim, something that was nishtana me'elav is kaina. As long as it was nishtana, a shina she'ene chezel b'riyaseh. It's a shina chezel b'riyaseh. It's not called a shina. Now gozel keli v'shavre, person steals a keli and he breaks it. Now the question is, normally we have the din by mazik, that all you have to do is pay for how much it went down in value. The item, the broken pieces, still belong to the nizik, just that the mazik pays for the broken pieces. By medvar mamurim, by a regular mazik. By a ganef, and al is a gazlan, we learned this already by a ganef, now we're saying it by a gazlan, it's different. By a gazlan, the din is that he keeps the broken pieces. He keeps the broken pieces, and he has to replace the money or the item to the nigzal. Gazel keli v'shavre ain't shamali abchas. You don't start evaluating how much is it worth less now because it's broken and giving back the broken pieces. El mishalim damav, he's supposed to pay back the actual money for the item. V'akeli hashaver shel gazlan, and the broken item belongs to the gazlan. However, the bratzu abaylim litle akeli hashaver, if the baylim want the keli hashaver, is netlim u'mishalim abchas shezu takoni lebaylim. The whole din that he has to give back, that he has to pay for the item and not only replace the value, is a takana for the bailam, that he has to give it to the bailam. Now, if the bailam says, I'm not interested in this takana, I'm interested in keeping the item, the broken pieces, and you just pay me the difference. So then he could insist that. The whole idea that the bailam could mon the money is a takana lebailam. And if the bailam don't want this takana, so over here, it's also, you have to understand, the Ram seems to be saying that's a din d'rabbanan. It's a din d'rabbanan of takana l'baylam. But I'll call upon him, that's the din. The din is that normally when a gazlan breaks something, so he has to pay for the item. He can't give him the broken pieces and say, I'll give you the difference of how much the original item was worth as opposed to the broken pieces. So on one hand, so he keeps the broken pieces. But on the other hand, the baylam could insist that they want the broken pieces. Whereas the gazlan doesn't have a right to keep the broken pieces unless the baylam don't want it. The bailam want it, so the bailam could insist, I want the broken pieces, you just pay me the difference of what it was worth. Halacha tezai. Gzeilah shalei nishtara. So you have a gzeilah that didn't change, but v'hukra, it went up in price. It went up in price. So till now we're speaking about a gzeilah that there was a shinui, it was a shvach. But here we're talking about there was no shvach, it was just went up in price. Is afal pish nisyaishu abaylam imeno. In other words, the Bailu when the Siyayish from this item, and we learned before that Yush is not Kana, but the Shvach that Boacher Yush, the Gaz belongs to the Gazl. So in other words, a Gazl steals an item, and then the Bailu will Miyayish. So we learned that if Lamashal it was Nisabra, it was Yolda, it was Gazaza, all these dinim, that belongs to the Gazlan. But Masha'inkin, if a person steals an item, and now the Bailim were in the Siyayish, the item still belongs to the Bailim, has to return the Bailim. And now the item went up in value. So now the Gazal is tiny. The fact that the item went up in value after years, so I should get that extra value. That doesn't happen. He says, Gzeilah Shalei Nishtanas V'Hukra, Afal Pishin Nesiyashu Abaylam Imenu, Harezu Chizeres L'Baylam. The item goes back to the Baylam, Eile Gazlan Baklum. And the fact that it went up in value doesn't give the Gazlan anything. Shalei Tiknu L'Gazlan S'Ashvach Achar HaYirush El Kegin Gizuz of Vladis. This din that the Gazlan is entitled to the Shvach Achar HaYirush is only the Gabi Gizuz of Vladis. Aval Shvach HaYeker, the fact that it went up appreciated in value. Im Hoysa Gzeilah Chizeres Be'inah. Since the Gzeilah is going back Be'en, in the Mele, he's not Zeicha at all. He gets nothing from the fact that it appreciated in value. I just forgot to mention in Halacha Zayin, when it talks about Gozel Porim U'Beres V'Nisyai Abaylim B'Achar Kach Yoldo, or Rochel Te'una V'Nisyai Abaylim B'Achar Kach Gozezo, so then he gets the Shvach belongs to the Gazlan. However, ve'im lifnei yush oy koidim shenishtana yolda igozazo, so then the gizes and the vlodas belong to the bailam. Now the lashon in the Rambam is ve'im lifnei yush oy koidim shenishtana. But l'chura it should say ve'im lifnei yush ve'koidim shenishtana, because lepeil, if it's lifnei yush and it's not koidim shenishtana, or it's koidim shenishtana and it's not lifnei yush, so then also the vlodas belong to the Gazlan. The only time the gizes and vlodas belong to the Bailam is only if it's lifnei yush and it's kedim shenishtana. So then it's yodei gazer agiz of l'shabayim. Meitaka says behemshach hail v'lei nisiyai shabayim v'lei nishtana sagzel, because they were both. So therefore it's b'rishus b'aleh hiyadayin. And the Rambam in Rambam Frankel Taki brings on the side over there Geshinu Gersois, that in a Sefer Muge, Itaka changes it. Instead of Oikoidim Shenistana, it should say Vikoidim Shenistana.